Steam locomotives have been saved from scrap throughout the years in many different ways. Some were donated to museums and preservation societies immediately after being withdrawn from service, some were purchased from scrapyards before they could be dismantled, and others were hidden in the backs of sheds or out-of-the-way sidings so as to keep them safe while efforts were made to save them. For many engines, it was simply a case of being in the right place at the right time. But one locomotive, however, managed to avoid the cutter's torch in a unique way. By crashing. Built in 1909, number 126 was a custom locomotive ordered from the Baldwin Locomotive Works by the Little River Railroad in Tennessee. The railroad needed a powerful engine that was not only lightweight, but also able to negotiate extremely tight bends. As such, a Mallet wheel arrangement was chosen, giving the engine the rare wheel layout of 2-4-4-2. It was the first engine of its kind and the first Mallet engine Baldwin ever built, fitted with 4-foot driving wheels, high and low pressure cylinders, Walschaerts valve gear, and initially running on coal before being modified to burn oil shortly before it was delivered. Little River Railroad took delivery of the new engine and were very pleased with it. For about 5 minutes. Despite being able to negotiate curves as tight as 160 feet and having a relatively light axle load, number 126 was too heavy for the railroad and often derailed on bends. After less than a month of use, the Little River Railroad sent it back to Baldwin and requested a smaller engine. Baldwin built another 2442 for the Little River Railroad which met their needs, leaving them stuck with 126. They put the engine up for sale and just under a year later it was purchased for use on the Columbia Riverbelt Line Railway in Blindslow, Oregon. Rather than numbers, the railroad gave their engines names, and so 126 was officially named Skookum, a Chinook jargon word meaning strong, powerful, reliable, or brave. The name seemed to be fitting, as the engine proved to not only be strong, but reliable too. It became a frequent sight on the line, and by 1911, countless local papers were reporting on and singing the praises of Skookum. The positive press led to Baldwin receiving well over 50 orders for logging engines from various railroads. While not quite able to traverse bumpy and poorly laid rails like Shays, Climaxes, and other logging engines, Skookum was more powerful than them to make up for it. Able to bring similar speeds and tractive effort as other conventional locomotives on lines that conventional engines otherwise wouldn't be able to run on. Even as newer, more refined logging engines came to market, Skookum was still light enough and powerful enough to keep working. In 1920, it was sold on to the Carlisle Pennell Lumber Company in Onalaska, Washington, where it was numbered 7, a number it kept for the rest of its working life. In 1924, it was transferred to New Orcombe Valley Railroad, leased to the Mud Bay Logging Company in 1930, worked for the Carlisle Lumber Company in 1931, before ending up in the hands of the Deep River Logging Company in 1933. It's at Deep River Skookum worked the longest as their primary locomotive, working the line frequently for 22 years and seeing plenty of action when in service. There's only so many trees you can cut down, however, and by 1955, Deep River was slowly discontinuing logging operations as the demand for lumber decreased. By February, it was just number 7 and an Alco 262 working the line, with the plan being to scrap both engines, the rails, and the remaining rolling stock at the end of the year. Despite being a unique and exceptionally performing engine, it seems nobody was interested in preserving number 7. Fate, however, had other plans. On the 23rd of February 1955, number 7 was running tender first, pulling a load of empty cars when it ran over a broken rail on a short trestle and derailed. It awkwardly tilted to one side but remained somewhat upright. The crew inspected the engine and felt it would be safe to leave it where it was. As it was already afternoon, the fireman dropped the fire and the crew went home, planning on re-railing number 7 in the morning. The fireman also decided to fill up the boiler just enough to cover the firebox crown sheet so they could light the fire once the engine was re-railed and put it straight back to work. This, however, was a mistake. The additional water shifted the engine's balance, causing it to topple off the line and onto the engine's side. Luckily, it didn't fall far and the ground was very soft, meaning number 7 had suffered minimal damage, but it would take a significant amount of time and effort to get the engine back on the rails. Given the logging company was going to end operations in a few months anyway, the decision was made to just abandon number 7 where it was and run the line using just the 262. When it came time to scrap the line, number 7 was found to be too remote and too awkward to cut up, and so rather than try to salvage it, the railroad just pulled up the track and left it in the middle of the woods. There the engine would remain for several years. Despite the line being gone, the engine wasn't forgotten. In 1956, not long after the line closed, a rail fan by the name of Charlie Morrow looked to purchase number 7 and get it running again, feeling such a unique and innovative engine deserved preservation. He managed to buy it at scrap value for $1,200 and formed a group to help restore the engine, but there was still the issue of actually moving the thing. The line was pulled up and no roads were near the site, and so it would be a monumental task to get the engine out of the woods. In the summer of 1960, Morrow and his colleagues set about dismantling the engine and taking it to their workshop piece by piece. Not only was the engine starting to rust from being exposed to the elements for so long, but the boiler hadn't been removed from the frame since it was built in 1909. The bolts were so worn and rusty that the team had to resort to blasting them with dynamite to separate them. The parts were eventually moved to Snoqualmie and left in Nilbok Yard where plans were made to restore and rebuild the engine, but these fell through. Number 7 remained in pieces for many more years, passing from owner to owner as attempts were made to get the engine into some kind of working order. Finally, in 2004, it was moved to the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad where work on reassembling the engine properly began. It took a long time, but finally in 2018, number 7 was steamed for the first time in its Columbia Riverbelt Line livery with its name proudly painted on its cab. After resolving some teething troubles, Skookum made its first official run in March 2019 and has since been running along the Niles Canyon Railway in California. Skookum's story is certainly a unique one. Not only did the engine earn its name, proving to be both powerful and reliable while in service, but also managed to evade the cutter's torch in an unusual way. Most engines that can't be re-railed are simply cut up where they lie, but Skookum was fortunate enough to derail in the perfect place to avoid that fate. Call it what you want. Maybe Skookum got away thanks to laziness on the railroad's behalf, or maybe it was just being in the right place at the right time. Whatever you believe, let the story be a reminder that just because you're off the rails doesn't mean you're at the end of the line. Subscribe for more.